Hey everybody, Clean Shaver here for West Coast Shaving again, and I want to teach you a little bit about shaving brush basics. We'll talk about a little bit of the vocabulary, the parts, the things you should know about buying a shaving brush and what to expect. So let's get into it. Now first, there are two primary parts to a shaving brush: the handle and the knot. Okay? Now the handle comes in different sizes and different materials and different designs, really. Generally, you'll see something made out of either a plastic resin. You'll see some made out of metal, some made out of wood, and even some that are made out of a ceramic or a plaster kind of material. You can get custom handles that look absolutely gorgeous. You can also get very standard model handles that do the trick just fine. The idea of the design is really just to provide good grip while you're using your brush. Now, let's talk about the different kinds of knots. A knot is the bristle part of your brush. Shaving brushes come in generally 4 different types of knots: a synthetic knot, a badger knot, a horsehair knot, and a boar hair knot. Let's talk about the little bit of differences between them. Synthetic knots are generally made out of plastic, or very, very fine plastic. Synthetic knots have gotten a lot better in the past 5 or 6 years as the technology has gotten better. The performance on these knots is really, really good, and the maintenance on them is very low, meaning that it doesn't really matter if you leave a synthetic knot wet, it's not going to get moldy or mildewy as fast as an animal hair knot. And plus, if you are concerned about the material being animal friendly, then of course a synthetic knot is probably the right choice for you. Now, badger knots come in a lot of different varieties, really. One thing that you'll hear tossed around is 2-band versus 3-band. Now, if you look closely at these brushes, you can see that one has 2 colors, 1, 2, and one has 3 colors, 1, 2, 3. 2-band, 3-band. Really, the only difference between the two is that the 2-band comes from one part of the badger and the 3-band comes from another. Now, with some of these animal hair brushes, when you first get them, you might notice a little bit of a funk to them. That's because they still smell like the animal they came from, sometimes. Not all the time, but that's easily treated. All you need to do is lather up some soap with it and maybe let your brush soak with the lather in it to help to alleviate some of that smell. Another thing that works really well is conditioner, like hair conditioner. So steal some of your girlfriend's conditioner for a little bit, rub it in the bristles, let it soak for a little bit, rinse it out very, very nicely, and soon you'll notice that the funk is gone. Otherwise, it just goes away with use. Now, you'll also find different grades of badger hair. You'll find a best badger, a fine badger, and a silvertip badger. Silvertip is sometimes called high mountain white. There's a lot of different variations on the name. Really, it's very similar grades of badger hair. The higher grade badger hairs have often been treated to become softer at the tips. The best badger or the fine badger are generally going to have a bit more coarseness to the hair, or a bit more scritchiness, as a term I coined in my last video about brushes. Really, you can't go wrong with a badger brush. Another element of badger brushes is the amount of water that the hair absorbs. Badger hair absorbs quite a bit of water and thus helps you in creating a lather, because as you create the lather, the water gets released from the bristles and helps you to add water to your lather. The other grades of animal hair will hold less and less amounts of water. So badger hair holds the most. Boar hair holds slightly less than the badger. Horsehair is another option and holds slightly less than the boar hair. And then synthetic really doesn't have any pores to it at all. So any water that you hold in the knot is really just being held in place by surface tension between the bristles. So that's a little bit about the parts and the things you should know about, especially the knot. Now let's go into a little bit of the terms that are used to describe the brush. First, let's talk about loft. Now, loft is a term that's thrown around quite often, and you'll hear that a brush has a loft of 48 millimeters or something like that. What that refers to is the distance from the top of the handle to the very pinnacle of the brush. So in this case, this brush has a loft of, approximately 54 millimeters. It's a rather tall brush. This synthetic brush has a loft of approximately 56 millimeters, so just slightly higher. You'll find a wide variety of different lofts of brushes, and that's okay. It really just depends on what you're looking for. Now, diameter, or size of the knot. The size of the knot, or the diameter of the knot, is determined by, well, the distance from one side of the base to the other. This, in this case, is a 24 millimeter synthetic knot. I know that because, hey, look at that. It comes out to 24 millimeters. Crazy, right? Now, there's another term that'll get tossed around with regards to the knot that you need to become familiar with, and that's backbone. Now, backbone is a fairly subjective term, actually. Backbone is determined often by the density of the fibers within the knot, how closely packed they are, and also the amount that the knot is sunk into the handle. I'll show you what I mean. So this synthetic knot, I would not say has a lot of backbone. In fact, it basically flops right down and I can squish it right into my hand. Okay? But this badger brush has a lot of backbone. I can barely push it into the palm of my hand. I can really do it if I really try, but there's a lot of backbone there. It's rigidity of the fibers. I have an empty handle and a blank knot here. So if I set it in there, there's not a lot of backbone there. There's some, but not a lot. If I sink it into the handle just a little bit more, so it has a lot less loft, then there's a lot more then there's a lot more backbone to it. Okay? Now, backbone is something that you either love or you hate. Some people like really floppy brushes, and really floppy brushes are generally good for bowl lathering. They're flipping it all over the place, and then you just basically paint it on your face. A lot of backbone is usually more preferred for face lathering. So, for instance, with this badger brush, there's a considerable amount of backbone, and I really like to face lather with it. That's just personal preference. Now, another thing you'll hear quite a bit about is the issue of price versus quality, particularly with badger brushes. Now, the difference between a $40 brush and a $200 brush, in all reality, is probably not that much. Both will give you a good lather and a good shave. But the quality of the hair usually goes up significantly with a more expensive brush. I've used very, very basic brushes, and I've used very high-end brushes. And I will say that the high-end brushes are really nice. Not necessary, but they are really nice. So it really depends on what you're wanting to do. If you've been into shaving for a while and you decide, you know what, I'm going to treat myself and I'm going to get myself a really nice badger brush, go for it. But you don't have to. This brush, it's a boar brush, I've had for going on 3 years now. And it started out very stiff, very prickly, but has softened quite a bit. This brush cost me about 25 bucks, and I love it. You can also get custom brushes. This one is a badger brush made out of buffalo horn. Pretty cool and very pretty. I really enjoy using this brush. This brush is going to be a lot more expensive than, say, my $25 boar brush. It's really up to you to decide what you want, and there's a lot to choose from. So check out the page here on West Coast Shaving. You can check out a lot of different options, whether it's synthetic, boar, badger, or horsehair. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Thanks again for watching. Be smooth, shave it up, and enjoy yourself. We'll see you next time, everybody.